Hi, and welcome back to the Mission Minded Podcast. I'm Jim Tingler, co-host with John Spinn.
Hello, Jim.
How you doing today, John?
I'm all right. Good to be here.
These intros are kind of fun because we just actually wrapped up the podcast, and so it's a little bit reflective.
That's right. It's nice to be able to do the intro after it's already happened.
Yes, so it was a great conversation. 68-year-old missionary, spent almost 40 years on the field in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And is still continuing the work back stateside.
That's correct.
And you have a connection with this gentleman by the name of Joel Kaufman.
I do. He's from Iroquois County, Illinois, small, 35,000 people in the whole county. Born in the same hospital I was born in, Watseka, Illinois. So
man, big things happening in that area.
For sure.
So he mentioned that your parents actually supported him for many years.
Yes, they did. They did. We kind of heard the stories and kind of followed them as we grew up. And yeah.
Probably had their picture on your refrigerator or something.
Probably.
Yeah.
We have a picture of them. When I go home, I see a picture of their family at my parents' house on their refrigerator. So
that's cool. You want to say hi to your parents that probably listen?
Sure. Hello, Mom and Dad. I know you're probably going to watch this. So
that's good. Good stuff. Appreciate you, John.
Well, thanks, Jim.
Appreciate you. Yeah, we appreciate Joel Kaufman joining us today on this podcast. And without further ado, let's get to it.
Welcome to Mission Minded, the podcast where we explore outside-the-box thinking in carrying out Christ's Great Commission. On this week's episode, we are joined by missionary Joel Kaufman. Our sponsor for today's podcast is Dignity Roasters Coffee. Locally roasted and packaged by the distressed to fuel each day. Dignity Roasters was born through a passion to partner with the distressed and the desire of bringing the universally loved beverage of coffee to your hands. To order your own coffee or to learn more about Dignity Roasters, visit their website at dignityroasters.com. Now here's your host, Jim Tingler and John Spinn.
Hey Joel, thanks for joining us on the podcast. It's good to have you today.
It's a real privilege to be on a This is my first podcast. I've never done it before.
It's ours too. Oh, yeah,
hey, we're trying to figure it out as we go as well. So you're good. You're in good company. So we appreciate having you on today. We had a little bit of a connection to make this happen, John.
That's true. Yeah.
So what's the connection? If you want to introduce Joel.
Well, it goes back to Iroquois County, Illinois. We had, earlier on the podcast, we've had Kim Smith and been a family friend for many years, and Joel, you'll hear about his time as a missionary, and my parents just kind of following your story growing up, and you're related to my friend Billy Kaufman as well, who came to visit ITEC not too long ago, and more recently we're able to see you guys a few months ago visiting. And just seeing the work that you're doing there among international students in Lafayette. And so, excited about our listeners to get to hear more about the work that, your story and the work, how God's continuing to write that story and the work that you're doing today. So
good stuff.
Thanks again. This is exciting.
So Joel, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself, maybe share about your own personal journey and the work that you're doing.
So I was born in Johnstown, actually, Watseka, Illinois, and my family was, taking me to these child evangelism camps and good news clubs and, of course, vacation Bible schools. And actually, my mom really always, was reading tracts to me. One of the things she read before I went to school oftentimes was like newsletters of persecuted Christians in various countries, before I went to school. And it really did give me a real sense that, my education was really just small compared to the big plan God had for the whole world, So I do consider her to be, my real discipler, led me to Christ. And then she was the one who filled out the papers for me to I never knew about Wheaton College, you know, actually I'm pretty sure Steve Saint was in a Bible study that I was in with some other Wheaton guys, you know, and yeah, it was a great time, 71, 75. But while I was there,
I was going to say that would help, you know, maybe clarify your age to the listeners that might not be watching you. So
yeah. I'm going on 68.
Wow.
So,
and I was curious, how old were you when your mom was reading those letters?
Oh, you know, grade school. I mean, she read stuff all the time, you know. So, wow. And we started a little Bible church, and so we had missionaries coming through our house and through church all the time, you know. I mean, these missionaries really did have a big influence in my life, but spiritual mentors did too, you know, and it kept me pure. I mean, I was very aware of you know, what was out there, and I really did want my life to count for God, you know. So I think those early decisions were very important for my life. And then at Wheaton, I got involved with some outreach at Northern Illinois University.
The Huskies.
And it planted a seed.
The Huskies.
Okay. And that planted a seed in my heart for, wow, this is really great. Because I was thinking about, you know, going into medicine, but I just wasn't there. You know, organic chemistry was just, that was going to take me to a level I was not ready for. And I was troubled.
Yeah, that's the great weed out course, right?
Well, sure it is. But I didn't know what I was going to do, you know, because I was trying to fulfill expectations of others. So, you know, I fasted and prayed one day, and I said, you know, Lord, what should I do? And it was almost like a voice, not quite, but this is like God saying, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to influence people for Christ. And the interesting thing was it was like this Holy Spirit voice came back, you know, then do it, you know. And I switched majors, got into Bible. And when I graduated from Wheaton, I went to Illinois State University and immediately got involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, did a summer out in San Bernardino with their Institute of Biblical Studies, and came back. Actually, the next year, InterVarsity asked me if I was just working at Mennonite Hospital, security guard, and supporting myself and being a volunteer, and they needed someone. So I joined InterVarsity Christian Fellowship as a full-time associate staff member, and it was a wonderful 3 years. And during that time, I went overseas to Ireland with Greater Europe Mission, summer project, and went to a lot of mission conferences and urbanas and all, you know, and I remembered all those early promises I had made, you know, when I was a kid, you know, saying, Lord, I want to be a missionary, you know, and so finally, what was it? The big turn for me was my dad died of a heart attack, and they sold the farm, and it's kind of, you know, like, I don't know, I was a real I liked being in my home farm, and it was being taken away from me. And I thought, well, you know, now's the time for me to, you know, continue to do what I was supposed to do. And so at that point, during the blizzard of, what was it, 78 or, you know, December there, I wrote a letter to a missionary I'd met who came through to our church, and she was from Japan, and she wrote a 7-page letter to me, basically, you know, telling me all the reasons why Japan was really needy. I didn't know it then, but I do now how needy it is. It's the second biggest unreached people group in the world. And the thing about the Japanese that I didn't know is that they had no concept of a creator. They had a 200-year-long Holocaust where all the Christians were destroyed, and every Bible in the whole archipelago was destroyed. And then when the first missionaries got there in the 1860s, 1870s, you know, they arrived late compared to India or compared to China or compared to Africa or the rest of the world. They were there really late. And by that time, the elite of Europe and America were also arriving same time and telling the elite people on top of Japan society, you don't want to believe these missionaries. They're just telling you fables, myths. We'll teach you true science. And so they introduced evolution as fact, not theory, fact. And the Japanese that made all the textbooks for Japan just took it, hook, line, and sinker. In fact, Darwin's Origin of the Species was published first in Japan.
Wow.
And so the Japanese had now this glove that fit Buddhism and Shintoism perfectly, because Shintoism and Buddhism did not have a real scientific explanation for how the world came about. The closest thing they had was the sun goddess stirring the stick in the Japan Sea and lifting up the stick, and wherever the mud fell, that was the Japanese islands. But no story of the whole world or anything like that. You know, that was the closest thing they had.
Well,
and so, yeah.
Oh no, I just one of the things that just wanted to pause as you said unreached, because typically, you know, primitive sense of missions is, you know, people often think very humanitarian of missions as poverty, you know, go live in a grass hut and provide medical care for people in Africa, for example. But, you know, like this idea of, you know, when we talk about the unreached, we don't, you know, Japan is a developed country. But it's a, you know, spiritually it's a dark place. And so just this idea of missions is about, you know, reaching the lost, not necessarily about, you know, we typically think of missionary, often think of it, you know, poverty stricken, you know, but I think it's important, you know, thinking about, you know, missions and lostness, and, you know, what you've said about Japan, you know, it isn't what people often think about, you know, but like you said, the spiritual darkness, the low, very low percentage of evangelical Christianity in that country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Japanese are very successful and they've got a good medical system. In fact, a lot of Japanese want to have their medical work done back in Japan. They don't trust America. But it's true, they all do if they can. So they're very satisfied, and it's a beautiful place. I mean, those mountains are just gorgeous, you know, and actually most of China knows about how beautiful Japan is, so they all spend their holidays. People from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, the whole Pacific Rim goes to Japan for holidays. You know, it's a great place. And so I didn't think of that. Let me tell you, when I was thinking about going to team candidate school, I of course I went to Wheaton, so I knew about team. And I went to a candidate school there where I happened to meet a whole bunch of great Japan missionaries. And boy, they inspired me. But the night that I was really making the final speech, I stood up in front of that crowd. I could not say anything. I was speechless. And God, I don't know, he really spoke to me. I mean, it's just like, I made a real commitment in a very amazing place. It's kind of crazy, but I couldn't control myself. I mean, I knew, you know, I wanted to be a missionary and everything, but well, the whole thing was a lot bigger than I was. And I suppose speaking in front of a group of people that are very amazing humbled me, you know. And I got serious with God. I really did. That I went to a place where nobody was, and I poured out my heart to God. I made a commitment there, and that wasn't the end, because months later, when I finally arrived in Japan, I was not prepared for the obstacles, the mountain, learning a language.
Mm-hmm.
I was so lonely. I went single, as a career missionary. Never been to Japan before. Didn't know any Japanese. The only Japanese I knew was Ohio gozaimasu, because that was Ohio, the state of Ohio. Now, let me tell you, that was about the only word that the two languages have in common. And
so how old were you at this point? Just
I
curious.
was 27.
27. Okay.
After working with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at Illinois State for 4 years, or 3 years, and Crusade 1. But anyway, no, I just was so lonely. And the interesting thing was that I started writing all these postcards to people, back in America, just to keep a connection. And to all these students at Illinois State, University of Illinois, and, Wheaton and every place else, And it was good. I made it, but I was really lonely. One day I came across an address that a former roommate had given to me. And he was from my hometown, Bloomington, Illinois. And he
State Farm.
ended up, yeah, right. He ended up marrying the girl who would become my sister-in-law. So this sister said, "Oh, when you go to Japan, you should meet Sally." Oh, so I came across her address in the pile of addresses. By the way, the people that ran the Japanese language school for teen were very concerned because Joel was writing a lot of letters home. Just flooded. The post office was just constantly going. And so one of these postcards was to Sally, and she was in another city in Japan. And so she writes back, gives me her phone number, and I call her, and I said, I roomed with your sister's husband, and before they got married, and so another missionary and her were going to go visit another missionary, and they invited me to come along on the trip, and that was the beginning of how we met in Japan. And it was like, I admit I was a bit impulsive because she was going to go back into an ASP program at Moody Bible Institute and was leaving in 2 months, and I really didn't want to lose her, and so I wrote a letter to her father. And she gave me her dad's address, and I wrote, I know you don't know me, but I would like to marry your daughter. I'm really praying about a relationship, and I'd like to get your blessing. So he wrote back, said it's very difficult, but he did mention that we were distantly related, so he knew about my family. So Sally goes to Moody, and I had proposed to her. She comes, and I was then preparing to go back the following spring, and we were married in June, and then we went back to Japan in September, and that began 38 years in Japan.
Wow.
We started 3 churches with different people, but also helped, dozens of other churches in central Japan, the area west of Tokyo.
Wow.
That was a great experience. Raised 5 children. In fact, I don't know if you can see this, but can you see this?
I could see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know, John, did you ever have this on your refrigerator?
I have seen that picture before.
Yeah, that's it. So, quite the life. And the kids, I'll tell you, missionary life is amazing for children. You talk about educational experience. And they were homeschooled. And they taught English. The neat thing was that, I was just thinking about this, having the children with us for all those years, and we didn't have to send them off to a boarding school, didn't have to send them to Tokyo. We could stay in the end of the train line across the Alps, the Japan Alps. They call them the Alps in Japan. At the end of the farthest reach on the Japan Sea, facing North Korea and Russia. There we were in the snow country of Japan. We have seen it snow 3 feet in one night.
Wow.
And so you talk about great snowboarding and skiing and everything on that side. But we had an English classroom, kind of a storage shed that we converted into an English classroom. And we had kids coming in, 4 or 5 days a week. We taught hundreds of children and their mothers and all sorts of people in that little storage shed. So the kids all learned how to teach English as a second language, and it was a really great experience for them. They all ended up being English teachers, the girls and the guys too. So, yeah, well, I could say so much about how God blessed us during those years. I am so thankful that I went to Japan. And now I've got a problem because I've got all these, I don't know, it's over 1,000 names of Japanese that are really, really special.
That's great. So while you were there, you were focused on church planting. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And we've, all the churches are in underneath Japanese leadership. Mm-hmm. And team was really known to be a church planting mission. And we're very privileged to be with some amazing people, over there.
And I think that's, thankfully a trend that we're seeing shifting of people seeing, the need for, there's still a place for the Western missionary to go, but always moving toward that, the indigenous population taking over, obviously, the history of ITEC of, Steve Saint working them on the Waodani, and they were so used to foreigners coming in and doing things for them. But really it's, the thing about missions, the goal is to raise up and empower the indigenous believers and allow them to really, help them to really establish, to be able to do ministry.
Take ownership.
Right.
Was that always the focus? Was that always your goal?
We were actually, originally, I was wanting to do work on a university campus, and I tried to different times, but as just doing evangelism and outreach. But I think team guided me in the early years to be underneath a veteran church planter, work with church planters. So from the very get-go, we were in church planting, and we did that up to the last 5 years. And then something really interesting happened. My last 10 years, all the church plants were not easy. I mean, basically, it was averaged about 10 years per church plant in Japan.
Wow.
But the last 5 years, we didn't think we had enough time to really start a church. And one of the things you don't want to do is have a half-produced or half-baked cake. You don't want to leave a church undone for others to finish. And so we mentioned that to our leadership in every country. Leadership and your mission, on your mission field, they're the people who really guide you and help you. And they actually gave us a new job, which was being head of the campground in the #1 resort of Japan. This resort is called Karuizawa. I'll spell it for anybody who's interested. Karuizawa, Karuizawa. And this town is where the emperor met his wife. It's where the CEOs and the rich and famous of the whole country have their summer houses up in this place, 3,000 feet above sea level, 1 hour bullet train ride out of Tokyo. And this place had an old church. And I wish I had a picture of the old church to show you. If anybody's interested, of course, I'd be happy to tell them all about everything in Japan. But this old church was called Karuizawa Union Church. And it was started by very famous people. The first missionaries were mostly Presbyterian, Methodist, and Lutheran missionaries. And the old denominational missionaries followed the train as far as it would go, and then they would climb up the mountain to this high plateau where they got together in the summer. And then when the German technology helped Japan build the railway up the mountains, then everybody was coming up there, and they wanted to make it like a Chautauqua of Japan, the Christian Conference Center, no alcohol at all, and no stores open on Sunday. It was just supposed to be a really Christian town. And the interesting thing was that all the Japanese who wanted to meet Westerners went up there, and they would barter and exchange things, and East met West up there. It was just amazing. The first Edwin Reischauer, who was ambassador from America to Japan, his parents were Presbyterian missionaries, and people like that taught the first Japanese how to play tennis in the very famous tennis court where the emperor met his wife. And this is right across the street from this very old Union church. So I'm sorry for
but that was your assignment then, was to, this is your last. Okay.
Karuizawa Retreat Center, which was 3 minutes walk away from this place, and just down 2 or 3 streets, and you're at this 5-acre property that the mission got right after World War II for what, $5,000 or something, and so then at this old church, I was always doing evangelism on the streets, and Sally was really managing the center, Karuizawa Retreat Center, and I just happened to be in the church one day when I noticed people really looking at the genealogy of Jesus, which was a big poster on the back wall as you went out of the church. It was this big poster of the, 4,000 years of history. I'm sorry, 2,000 years of history. No, 4,000. I'm sorry. You're gonna have to splice the tape from Adam and Eve to Jesus. And so, man, everybody was stopping, really looking at it, really talking about it. So I thought, it's kind of like Paul in Athens, hey, this is the altar to the unknown God here. This is going to help me make a bridge. And I had done that a lot throughout my time in Japan. I used tracts by really famous people printed by Word of Life Press, which was the biggest Christian publisher in Japan. Word of Life Press had made amazing tracts by really well-known people that had been on TV, and so you need bridges for people. That they need to put you in a box. They need to know where you're coming from, and if they know you're from a trustworthy Orthodox, Orthodox kind of real Christianity and not a cult, then they would trust you more. Not necessarily completely, but still they would trust you more, because these people really. And I'd love to tell you about some of these really famous Japanese. But the poster at the back of the church was this, thing I was really excited about. And it just so happened at that very same time, this famous comedian who'd been on countless advertisements and movies, and he had his own TV show. He traveled around Japan seeing famous places. He was doing a documentary on our town. And so he comes into the church, because the church is, it's a famous place. He goes into the church. He always wore sunglasses, and his name was Tamori. And Tamori said, ask me, this church is the reason for this town. This whole town started because of this church. After he said that, I kid you not, I kept track in a journal, because I was there every day. We had over 10,000 people, and this is just over a few years. And still, I don't know how many more thousands have come just in the last several years, but 10,000 came to see that church. So I was there, greeting everybody and giving them a little tour of the church. And then on your way out, you say, oh, and this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Do you know about Adam and Eve? You know about the first human beings? And most of them had. And then there you go. You just start off from Adam and Eve, and you tell the gospel story, all the way to Jesus Christ. And by the way, Jesus was at the top of the genealogy. So they're looking at Adam and Eve, and then you go up the genealogy. There's lo and behold, there's Jesus Christ. There it is. And you talk about what he did, what he said. As a challenge to everybody on this podcast, I want to say, very few people in Japan had ever really heard that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, a lot of people think, oh, yeah, resurrection like spiritually or something. So what I had was this Evangelical. I wanted to get the point across really strong. So this Evangelical was in my hand, and I said, Jesus did miracles, and they said, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the one that takes away the curse and destroys Satan and establishes your kingdom?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "No, you're a liar and deceiver." The Japanese would always, kind of, "Yeah, liar, deceiver." They would be totally with me at that point. But I said, "What? If you kill me, I'm going to rise the third day." And about that time, I talked with thousands of Japanese. They were really with me. One guy would not leave. He was ready to leave, but he kept his head poked inside the door to hear what happened next. So it's just like I pull out the Evangelical, and Jesus is on the cross. And I said, "See, he told him he was going to rise." So then the next Evangelical is Jesus' tomb surrounded by soldiers. And I see they didn't want anything to happen to that body. And so they made sure they had soldiers around that tomb, and they put a seal on that tomb so no one would break that seal. And if they did, they would have been crucified. And so then I say, but on the third day, and I just moved the Evangelical. You guys have ever seen the Evangelical?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus pops out of the tomb. I mean, I've had people, wow, they were just sort of surprised, and it's just like, that was really exciting to say that again and again and again to thousands of people. And I haven't lost it, even now at Purdue University. I mean, I am still really making sure that we get this point dead across. The point is, Jesus appeared to more than 500 people, and they all went to the ends of the earth. I tell Indian students, and they all know about southern India, where Thomas went to. I talk about Thomas and, the whole thing. I'm so excited to talk about the resurrection to everybody, and that he's coming back, and he's going to make a kingdom, and he's going to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's a very simple gospel message, but anyway, now I've really gotten off the track.
I think you were getting to the next chapter, and that Japan's story is wrapped up, but you mentioned Purdue University, and that's where you are now.
Yeah, and if I could say one thing too, you talked about a story that connects with. You think about missions. You think about like Don Richardson and the Peace Child story of entering their culture and finding a way, the Apostle Paul, Mars Hill, Acts 17, I'm going to make known to you this unknown God. And I think that's an important, contextualization of understanding the language and the culture enough where you can connect, you understand enough about their language and their culture that you can connect. You think about Philip and the Ethiopian, he began with that passage of scripture. And so I think that's important as we think about missions and how do we communicate that? And so, it's interesting.
What's so exciting, Jonathan, if I can break in, is we had the perfect place because people trusted that church. It was built by really famous, respected Japanese, and they were all coming in there. So I had the turf, so to speak. I mean, I had the position, they were
platform.
listening to anything I would say. And then you give them a packet of like 5 or 6 things in a packet. Everybody took it,
Well, it's funny. You mentioned, so it's kind of your transition here. You went to Japan hoping you could do international, you do college ministry because that's what you'd done. And then now your world has flipped out. You came back from Japan and now you're doing college ministry.
That's right.
So if you could tell us about your work that you're doing now and your obvious transition from
So my daughter had an accident. Abby hit a horse north of Fort Wayne, Indiana, in 2016, and my wife and I were prepared for a funeral. Really, I mean, she was so covered with horse, they didn't know what was Abby and what was horse. Fortunately, her Toyota car seat snapped and went down. The horse ripped the whole top of the car off. The driver kept the car on the road and managed to get out of the car and go to an Amish house that produced a cell phone that called an ambulance, and then the ambulance arrived within 20 or so, 30 minutes. And Abby was still amazingly breathing. She was still breathing, and got to Parkview in North Fort Wayne there, and was hooked up. And for 2.5 weeks, she was in semi-comatose, or she was induced coma, and survived, and then spoke, and then remembered, and then swallowed, and then walked, and then did rehab. And today she's married and lives in Madison.
Wow.
Amazing. And doing counseling. But that is why we got back to America. And I really knew that I wanted to be with international students. So it turns out our son is a graduate of Purdue and engineer here in town. And so we came here to Lafayette, and we're really excited about the ministry of Sioux Street Baptist Church and Crosswalk Commons right on campus, and how it works with international students. And even though COVID hit, we're still doing a lot of Zoom Bible studies with all the Asian students, and it's just wonderful. I think one of the things that I'm really thankful for is, after having been in Japan so long, you know how to speak slowly and how to make simple sentences. And my Chinese say, "Oh, we can understand you,"
That's good.
Well, it helps,
We have a couple guys around here that we say you have to translate it twice. First from English, and then drain some oil from the drain pan.
A little bit of a southern drawl.
So
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. So can you explain the work that you're doing now at Purdue?
So, because Crosswalk Commons has a lot of bicycles, we have a lot of contacts with students all over campus. And these are really good bikes. And we have a state-of-the-art bike shop that fixes
I got to see it.
bikes, Yeah, it's a great place. And Lee Hargett, Dana Gottfried are just excellent. They could take a bike apart, take it all the way down to the main axle, and pack the bearings and everything. And yeah, they're great and real servants. And Paul Briggs, Sarah Menifee, they're doing a great job. And they all had mission experience and been overseas. And so we've made contacts with a lot of people, and
Working on bikes.
well, for me, I have done farm tours. And can I get a picture on here? Is there a way to?
You probably can.
Can you reverse it?
Well,
so
but then a lot of our listeners
can't
wouldn't be
see it?
able to see it.
Okay,
So
well, I'll
maybe
just
try to.
describe it.
Yeah.
So I do farm tours, and I know farmers north and west of Lafayette, and I take international students to see all these farmers, to ride tractors and combines and
Nice.
see their operations, and then make contacts through these farm tours, and then invite them to Bible studies and other tours. Like, we take a lot of people to the Creation Museum in Kentucky. And I have found that Creation Museum is amazing, because in one trip, you're talking all the way out, orienting them a little bit to the museum. And then at the museum, you can see the whole history of the world, the biblical history of the world, really fast in a museum. And they have really turned in their thinking. One of them said, thanks to that museum, he changed his whole opinion about the Bible and its biblical history. And my point is to really focus on the flood and the catastrophe that it was, starting from, really focusing on that, especially. You can prove the flood a million ways. A billion ways. What, all these billions of dead things buried, laid down by water all over the world. I mean, it was catastrophe, Oh, I can go on and on about that and get me going about creationism too, But anyway, I better not now.
I think one of the key things that stands out is that you mentioned 68 years old, right?
Yes.
Well, we live in Central Florida, and John, how do you explain it? People
The land of the newlyweds and the nearly deads. So,
and they come down to Florida to. How do you?
Yeah, it's often it's like what John Piper talks about on the back cover of "Don't Waste Your Life." You know, people. This couple, It's a Reader's Digest story about a couple that took early retirement to collect seashells and play softball, and so we're surrounded by people. I think about in my neighborhood of it's a sad existence for many of them because it's just it's like what Chuck Colson talked about in How Now Shall We Live. Some of the most depressed people you'll ever meet are in Naples, Florida, because they've worked their whole life thinking that this is the pinnacle, this is retirement, this is a chance for me to just focus on me and do whatever I want to do and not, and so when I think about a message for our listeners of somebody like yourself who's 68 years old, rather than, winding down, looking how to, take a knee and run out the clock on life, you're taking your language skills that you have from your time in Japan and you're intentionally, implanting yourself in a community where you can have a unique ministry opportunity with international students. And so that's more the message that we want, for our listeners to say, whatever, Don't Waste Your Life was written for kind of young people and people at the end of their career of, God's not done with you. God, whatever season you're in, God has something for you and really seeking that out and, searching out, seeking after God and what he might have for you in whatever season of life, we're in.
The Bible has so much to say about the foreigner, the stranger, and they were supposed to be educated by Israel, about the laws of God and treated with justice and fairness. And I think we have a responsibility to reach out to all the people that are coming to America. The world is coming to us. Mm-hmm. And the neat thing is that many of these people are coming from very hard to reach areas. I have one family, they're Muslim, and we're going through Genesis, and it's totally exciting. And we started going on farm tours, they loved it. And then we went to the Creation Museum, they liked that. And then they said they wanted to study the Bible, and now we're on Zoom, once a week. So it just comes from making friendships and letting people know you love them and want to be their friend, and then everything happens, just so naturally.
So what message do you have for the Western Church?
Yeah, I really want to underscore that statement that the world is coming to America, and we have people in America who are from unreached people groups, like the Japanese, and these people are totally wide open. Do you know, in that second and first church plant, we had people who were reached for Christ in America by people. I never will forget suddenly meeting these young people. One had been converted in Colorado, another one Wabash College, Indiana, another one Oregon, another one, Carbondale, Southern Illinois University. Okay, so they come back to Japan, and they're needing discipleship, and they must be followed up. We were so blessed, and they helped us get that church off the ground.
Oh, that's great.
So these were amazing. Japanese who had come to the U.S. as students, heard the gospel, responded, came back to Japan, and these were the people who were
they were baptized.
Wow.
Yeah, some of them were even baptized in America.
Wow.
This is totally exciting.
Yeah.
And that church would have taken so much longer had they not been part of that group to help us get that church off the ground.
That's great.
So, and especially for the Muslim world, I really feel like we need to work hard. There's a lot of Muslims, and they love making friends. They're just wanting friends so bad. It's wonderful. And you can make a friend. And our girls in Japan actually had Pakistani neighbors. And there we were in Japan with Pakistanis living right next to us. Our kids found out all about Islam. It was wonderful. It was very educating.
Wow. So, Joel, how could people be praying for you and your ministry today?
So, I think we need workers on all these campuses across America, but in all these big, medium-sized cities across America too. Let's pray that God raises up people who really see very open people right under their noses. A lot of us are thinking, oh, America has so many people that hate what do they call it now? The national church, or the new term for the evangelicals. Evangelicals are the danger zone. People don't want to talk to us or whatever. But there's a lot of people in America that are totally just wanting a friend, someone who will listen to them. And they're all around us. They're all around us. And especially the foreigner and the stranger and the people that don't quite fit the mold, but that includes a lot of people. So I think we need to pray for each other, at this point, really, to
see the
love
fields.
People,
love the
way
people.
Jesus did. Yeah.
Lift up your eyes, look at the fields are ripe and ready for harvest.
They're ripe.
Yeah.
Oh, they're all around us. They're right under our nose, And then if we, especially the people that are thinking about overseas work, if you understand taking that gospel and getting down to its core seed, and if you're able to communicate that gospel to another culture, crossing a cultural barrier, then you're more prepared to go overseas. You're the prime candidate that anybody would say, oh, we need you, So really people need to practice doing this, here in America before they ever go overseas, I think.
Well, John, do you have any final thoughts? I think our time is getting close here. Joel, really encouraged to hear your story, and just a story of faith and how God has provided. And whether the workers for your church or the opportunities for you over there, provided a wife and partner in this ministry, and just appreciate your heart to continue serving. 68 years old, going strong. And I love hearing from people like you, because that's my goal. I want to be a guy that's pressing on through the finish line, and not, as John likes to say, taking a knee and running out the clock. So appreciate your example.
Let me add one more thing. If you do follow the Lord, He will bless you. My family's been blessed. Sure, they had hard times, but I really feel they've been blessed. And we had difficulties. Balancing ministry and family. By the way, my wife is very much involved with the grandkids. As we speak, she's in California with the grandkids, and son and daughter-in-law, and having a wonderful time. But God will guide you on all that too, and He will bless you. It's going to be, of course, a spiritual battlefield that you're entering, but He will be with you all the way.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Well, good words to end on. Jesus, we talk about Great Commission participation, Matthew 28 of surely I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That's how Jesus finishes, his final words to his disciples. And so that's, important thing to remember of whatever God asks us to do, He's going to be with us every step of the way.
Amen.
So,
Well, Joel,
I'm waiting for some wedding dresses that they're arriving this week. So my main job is to be here when the wedding dresses arrive for my daughter.
oh man,
So-
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
a big deal.
She's getting married June 12th. The one that was in Nepal.
Oh wow,
Okay.
Yeah.
congratulations, that's a big deal.
Thank you. Thanks.
Good stuff. Well, thanks again, Joel. Appreciate your work and just an opportunity to be able to chat with you today.
Yeah. Thank
God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Mission Minded. For more information on today's topic and show notes, please visit our website, itecusa.org. Mission Minded Podcast is produced by ITEC. The goal of this podcast is to inspire conversations about Great Commission participation. The views, organizations, and individuals represented, interviewed, and discussed on the podcast do not necessarily represent an official position or formal partnerships with ITEC.